The night I saved Adrian Morelli from a $250 million lie. I was wearing shoes so cheap I could feel every crack in the marble through the soles. That was the first thing I remember. Not the chandeliers hanging like captured stars above the ballroom. Not the string quartet tucked into the corner, turning the air soft and expensive. Not even the way the city glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like Manhattan itself had dressed up for the evening. I remember my feet hurting, my tray feeling too heavy, and the quiet voice in my head reminding me that if I got through one more shift without dropping anything, I could pay Con Edison on Friday and maybe still have enough left for groceries. I was 24 years old, living in a studio in Queens with a radiator that hissed all night like it was angry at me personally, and I had no business being inside a room like that. The Grande Regent Hotel was all gold leaf, black tuxedos, and women who wore diamonds like they forgot they had them on. I was just the waitress refilling champagne and pretending not to notice that one watch at table 9 probably cost more than my student loans. My name tag said Chloe, my smile said I was doing just fine, and my bank account said otherwise. That was the thing about nights like this. They sold elegance, but if you worked them, you saw the machinery underneath. The fake laughter, the strategic handshakes, the wives scanning each other's dresses. The men talking low over million-dollar deals while somebody like me floated past with sparkling water and truffle canapés. I knew how to disappear. That was half the job. Keep your head down. Move quietly. Never interrupt a rich man's sentence. Especially not when that rich man was Adrian Morelli. I heard his name before I saw him. People never said it loudly. They said it the way church people say amen or little kids say thunder. With certainty. With caution. With that tiny pause that means power just entered the room. Mr. Morelli has arrived. One of the event coordinators whispered into her headset, suddenly standing straighter. 2 security men shifted near the entrance. A donor from Westchester nearly spilled his drink, trying to turn fast enough to look casual. That was when I glanced over and saw him crossing the ballroom like the evening belonged to him. He wasn't loud. He didn't have to be. Dark suit, no tie, black hair brushed neatly back, expression calm in a way that made everybody around him more nervous, not less. Tall enough to make other men straighten their shoulders when he passed. Handsome, yes, but that wasn't what hit me. It was control. The kind that didn't need to perform itself. The kind that made space open before he even asked for it. He moved past senators, CEOs, and hedge fund men like they were all temporary details in a room he intended to outlast. And for some reason, when his gaze traveled once across the ballroom, I looked away so fast I nearly clipped a champagne flute with my tray. Careful, Madison muttered as she swept by me with a tray of oysters. That's Morelli. I heard. Then don't look at him again. I would have laughed if my stomach hadn't gone tight. I had no reason to care who he was. Men like Adrian Morelli existed in a different ecosystem than women like me. He probably spent more on one dinner than I paid in rent in a month. I was a night student finishing my accounting certificate one class at a time, doing event shifts because tips were better than diner work, and because rich people smiled more when they were holding crystal. My whole plan for the night was survive, clock out, take the F train home, and microwave leftover pasta while pretending my life was on schedule. Then table 14 changed everything. I was sent over with a fresh bottle of vintage champagne and instructions to be invisible. 4 men sat there. Expensive suits. Expensive cufflinks. Expensive boredom. The kind of men who acted like every room had been built for them specifically. Adrian stood at the head of the table, one hand in his pocket, the other resting near a leather folder opened beside a silver ice bucket. He wasn't drinking. He was listening. 2 older men were speaking in Italian, low and fluid, too confident to imagine anybody nearby might understand. Most people didn't. Most people heard pretty vowels and moved on. I didn't. My grandmother had raised me on Sicilian prayers, old films on a secondhand TV, and late-night warnings spoken in a language she said carried truth better than English ever could. I learned numbers before lullabies. I learned bank terms at her kitchen table because she used to balance ledgers for a private institution in Brooklyn and liked to say that fraud always sounded elegant right before it collapsed. I bent to refill a glass, and one phrase slid through the music so clearly it made my hand freeze around the bottle. Wrong routing district. Wrong terminology for the transfer path. One man used the formal word for guarantee. but the second answered with a structure nobody from Milan or Rome would use in finance. It was polished, it was rehearsed, and it was wrong. My pulse kicked hard. I kept pouring. The champagne hissed softly into crystal, bubbles climbing fast, while the men kept talking like I was furniture. Maybe I should have walked away. Maybe a smarter woman would have. But my grandmother's voice came back so vividly, I could almost smell her espresso. If the paper is real, the language breathes. If it's fake, it poses. I looked down. The documents in the folder were cream-colored, thick, impressive. Too impressive. The signatures were unnaturally even. The watermark was visible from the wrong angle. My throat went dry. I set the bottle down before I dropped it. And for the first time all night, I stopped trying to disappear. I do not know what possessed me. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the memory of my grandmother tapping red nails against our chipped kitchen table and telling me that numbers were honest even when people were not. Maybe it was the way those men spoke with too much confidence and not enough precision, like actors reciting lines in a language they had only learned phonetically. Whatever it was, it pushed me 1 inch closer to the table and straight into the kind of mistake that changes your life before you even realize you made it. I kept my eyes on the nearest champagne glass because it felt safer than looking at Adrian Morelli directly. My voice came out lower than I expected, almost lost beneath the strings and the hum of expensive conversation. "Mi scusi," I said softly. "This document is fake." The words were out before I could call them back. For one impossible second, nobody moved. The older man on Adrian's left blinked at me as if a lamp had started speaking. The other one gave a short, dismissive laugh, but it sounded thin around the edges. I felt heat climb my neck. My manager was going to fire me. Security was going to drag me into the service hallway. I was going to lose the only decent-paying side job I had because I had mistaken courage for stupidity in a ballroom full of people who could ruin me without spilling their drinks. Then Adrian looked at me. I had been aware of him all night, but being the direct focus of his attention was something else entirely. His eyes were not dramatic the way novels describe dangerous men. They were steady, quiet, dark enough that I could not tell where his thoughts ended and his patience began. He did not look angry. He looked interested, which somehow felt far more dangerous. "Explain," he said. One word. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just a command wrapped in silk. Every instinct I had told me to apologize and walk away. Instead, I heard myself answer. "The terminology is wrong for a transfer that size," I said, still keeping my voice low. "And the regional reference is inconsistent with the institution named on the page. The phrasing is polished, but it does not sound like real banking language from Italy. It sounds copied." One of the men at the table smiled too fast. "I think your waitress is confused," he said in perfect English, smooth and easy and suddenly very eager to move us all along. "She is working very hard, clearly, but perhaps she misunderstood." Adrian never took his eyes off me. "Did you?" My mouth was dry. "No." The room around us blurred at the edges. I could still hear glass clinking somewhere behind me, still smell champagne and candle wax and the citrus polish they used on the marble, but all of it felt far away now. The only thing that seemed real was that folder on the table and the man in front of me deciding whether I had just embarrassed him or saved him. Adrian reached for the document with elegant, unhurried fingers and turned one page. Then another. He did not flip through it like someone skimming. He studied it. The men across from him grew visibly still. One adjusted his cuff. The other reached for his water and forgot to drink it. I caught a flash of irritation from my manager near the bar. She had noticed. Wonderful. Adrian shifted his gaze to the signature page, then to the embossed seal near the bottom corner. He angled the paper slightly toward the chandelier light. Something in his expression changed. Not much, just enough that my stomach dropped. He had seen it too. I knew the exact moment because the air at the table went colder. "Interesting," he said. The man who had dismissed me gave another laugh, but this one was brittle. "Surely this can be clarified in private." Adrian closed the folder. Softly, deliberately. "I am sure it can." He did not raise his hand high. He barely moved at all. But two men in dark suits appeared beside the table almost immediately, as if they had been waiting just outside the edge of vision the entire time. They were not dramatic either. No grabbing. No scene. Just quiet efficiency, the kind that made everyone nearby suddenly find something else to look at. The two supposed investors stood, smoothing their jackets, speaking in tight little smiles that fooled nobody now. One of them glanced at me as he stepped back from the table, and the look in his eyes was the first thing that made real fear crawl down my spine. Not rage. Recognition. As if he had already memorized my face. Adrian noticed that too. I knew he did because his attention sharpened by half an inch, and somehow that half inch felt enormous. Within seconds, the men were escorted away toward a side corridor lined with white orchids and gold sconces, so discreetly that half the ballroom probably thought they were headed to a private cigar room. The quartet never stopped playing. The donors kept smiling. Somewhere behind me, somebody started laughing too loudly at a joke that could not have been funny. That was Manhattan for you. Even disaster wore a tuxedo. I was still standing there with the empty champagne bottle in my hand when my manager reached me. "Chloe," she hissed through clenched teeth. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I turned toward her, and for the first time since I opened my mouth, my knees felt weak. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I heard something wrong in the documents. You are a waitress, not federal law enforcement." Her smile stayed pasted on for the guests drifting nearby, but her eyes were furious. "Go to the service station. Now." Humiliation hit me in a hot wave. I set the bottle on the tray of a passing busser with hands that no longer felt fully connected to my body. I could feel Adrian's gaze on me even as I stepped back, even as I lowered my head and moved toward the curtained service entrance near the west wall. I told myself not to look at him again. I looked anyway. He was still at the table, one hand resting on the closed folder, watching me with an unreadable expression that made it impossible to tell whether I had just saved his fortune or walked straight into the center of something much bigger than money. The service corridor behind the ballroom smelled like bleach, burnt coffee, and panic. Not loud panic. Rich people panic. The kind that hid behind lowered voices and polished shoes moving twice as fast as usual. I stood beside a rolling cart stacked with dessert plates and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal person. My manager, Denise, was still muttering under her breath at the far end of the station, rearranging linen napkins with the furious precision of a woman deciding whether I was a liability or a miracle. My hands would not stop shaking. I pressed them flat against the stainless steel counter and stared at my reflection in a silver dome tray. Pale face. Loose strand of brown hair falling out of my bun. Eyes too wide. I looked exactly like what I was. A waitress from Queens who had spoken out of turn in a room full of people who treated money like oxygen. "What were you thinking?" Madison whispered, appearing at my elbow with a bus tub full of empty glasses. "I was not," I whispered back. Clearly, her tone should have annoyed me, but it was too gentle for that. She glanced toward the ballroom entrance, then lowered her voice. "Denise says if the client complains, you are done." "I know. Did you at least save somebody from something real?" I swallowed. "I think so." Madison let out a slow breath. "Great. So either you are a genius or we are both updating our resumes by Monday." She drifted away before I could answer, pulled by another shouted request from the kitchen. I stayed where I was, counting backward in my head the way I did before exams. 100, 99, 98. Anything to keep from imagining the rest of the night. Losing the job would hurt, but not the way people in that ballroom thought hurt worked. They thought embarrassment was pain. I knew better. Pain was opening your refrigerator and pretending mustard counted as dinner. Pain was choosing between subway fare and laundry. Pain was smiling at customers while calculating whether your checking account would survive a prescription refill. I needed this job. I needed all my jobs, which meant I should have regretted what I did. But under the humiliation and the adrenaline, something else kept flickering. A hard little spark of certainty. The documents had been wrong. I knew they had. My grandmother had taught me too well to miss it. I could see her in my mind as clearly as if she were standing there beside the industrial dishwasher, tiny and elegant in one of her old cardigans, her silver hair pinned back, her accent thickening every time she got emotional. "Chloe," she used to say, "numbers tell the truth even when people decorate the lie." She had worked for 27 years in private banking before arthritis bent her fingers and time bent everything else. By the time I was old enough to care, she was retired and living in our apartment, teaching me Italian over canned soup and balancing old check registers just to keep her mind sharp. She was the one who taught me that language was not just words. It was context, tone, structure, Tiny mistakes people made when they were pretending to belong in rooms that had never fully opened for them. I had loved that about her. The way she could hear one sentence and know whether the speaker carried truth or costume. I was still lost in that memory when the service door swung open again. One of the hotel security supervisors stepped in first, scanning the corridor, followed by a man in a dark suit I recognized from the ballroom. He was one of Adrian Morelli's people. Not large, not theatrical, not trying to frighten anyone. Somehow that made him more intimidating. He looked like the kind of man who never had to repeat himself. Denise straightened immediately. "Can I help you?" she asked, smoothing her jacket. The man's gaze moved past her and landed on me. "Mr. Morelli would like a word with Ms. Parker." The room went quiet in a way I felt in my spine. Denise looked at me, then back at him. "She is currently working." "Not right now, she is not." His voice was perfectly polite. That was the worst part. If he had barked or demanded, I might have found a way to be angry. But politeness leaves you nowhere to hide. Denise hesitated for half a second, then turned toward me with the expression managers save for disasters they cannot control. "Chloe, go." I should have refused. I know that now. I should have said I was busy. I should have said I was not authorized to speak with guests privately. I should have said literally anything sensible. Instead, I wiped my palms on the sides of my black skirt and followed the man through the service door back toward the ballroom. The music hit me first, then the light, then the strange, disorienting fact that the party had continued as if nothing important had happened at all. Waiters moved between tables with trays held high. Donors laughed beside towering arrangements of white orchids. Someone near the dance floor was discussing vineyard acreage like the world had not tilted an hour earlier. It made me feel briefly insane. The man led me not to the table where it had happened, but to a smaller private lounge just off the main ballroom, screened by smoked glass and brass latticework. Quieter, dimmer, the kind of place deals were probably made and denied in the same breath. Adrian Morelli stood alone near the window with the city behind him. Up close, the control I had noticed earlier felt even sharper. He had removed his jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. His white shirt was immaculate. His sleeves were rolled once at the forearm, neat and exact, revealing a watch so understated it probably cost more than my yearly rent. He turned when I entered. The man who brought me stepped back and closed the door, leaving us in a silence so complete I could hear the faint hum of the hotel ventilation. Adrian studied me for a moment that felt longer than it was. Not in a way that made me feel admired. In a way that made me feel assessed. Seen too clearly. "Chloe Parker," he said at last, as if testing the shape of my name. "Yes." My voice came out steady. That surprised both of us. His gaze flicked briefly to my face, then back again, almost approving. You understood everything they were saying. It was not a question. Enough. Enough to stop me from signing. There it was. Not gratitude. Not yet. Just fact. Clean and sharp. I nodded once. Yes. He moved closer by a step, not crowding, just changing the air between us. A waitress from Queens does not usually correct cross-border banking language in perfect Italian at a Manhattan gala. My pulse jumped. I never said I was from Queens. One corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile. Something more restrained. More dangerous. "No," he said softly. "You did not." Which means this conversation is becoming even more interesting. For the first time that night, I forgot to be afraid of him and became afraid of how much he already knew. The private lounge suddenly felt smaller, the smoked glass walls too close, the soft jazz from the ballroom beyond them too distant to matter. I kept my chin level anyway because my grandmother had also taught me this. When someone powerful knows something you did not give them, never reward them with visible panic. "You had me followed?" I asked. Adrian tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether I deserved the truth or only the useful version of it. "You were working in my line of sight for 40 minutes, he said. A woman balancing 12 crystal flutes while silently translating a banking conversation in Italian tends to invite attention. He stepped toward the side table and lifted the leather folder I had seen earlier. He did not open it this time. He only held it, thumb resting against the edge like he could already feel every lie trapped inside. "Queens was an educated guess," he added. "Your shoes are practical, not fashionable. Your accent is New York, but not uptown. And your right sleeve is frayed at the cuff from carrying trays for longer than someone with better options would choose to." Heat rose in my face before I could stop it. Not because he was wrong. Because he was precise. That was worse. I looked down at my sleeve automatically and hated that I had confirmed any part of his observation. You make a habit of profiling waitresses? I asked. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened with interest again, like he appreciated resistance more than obedience. I make a habit of noticing what other people miss. The answer landed somewhere between warning and confession. I folded my hands in front of me so he would not see them tremble. Then you noticed I saved you a great deal of money. Money can be replaced. He said it so calmly that I almost laughed. People with his kind of money always said things like that, as if bills appeared by divine appointment. But then he continued, and the room lost a few more degrees of warmth. Trust cannot. That silenced me. He walked to the window, city lights reflecting faintly in the glass behind him. And for a second, he looked less like the most dangerous man at the hotel, and more like someone carrying a weight he had grown too used to naming. Those men should not have reached my table, he said. The fact that they did means someone inside one of my institutions cleared them. I stared at him. Institutions. Banks. Shipping. Real estate. Enough to keep very expensive people interested in making introductions they should not make. He turned back toward me. Tonight was not just a fake transfer. It was a test. A very expensive one. I thought about the two men at the table, their polished accents, their eager smiles, the way one of them had looked at me before he left. Recognition, not surprise. My stomach tightened, and I interrupted it. Yes. No hesitation. No comfort in the word. Just truth. You embarrassed them in front of me, which means whoever sent them will want to know who you are. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry again. I am nobody. Adrian's gaze held mine for a long, unreadable beat. That would have been safer. The honesty of it unsettled me more than any threat would have. I took a slow breath and forced myself to think. My grandmother worked in private banking, I said. That is why I recognized the language. She taught me Italian. She taught me how documents are supposed to sound when they are real. Something flickered in his expression then. Not softness exactly. Recognition, maybe. Respect stripped of sentiment. And she taught you to speak up in rooms where silence would have protected you. No, I said before. I could stop myself. She taught me that letting a lie pass is how decent people end up paying for other people's greed. The words hung between us. Too bold. Too personal. I realized what I had said only after it was too late to take it back. Adrian looked at me in a way no one had all night. Not like staff. Not like decoration. Not even like an inconvenience. Like I had shifted, somehow, from background to variable. How old are you? He asked. 24. And you work every event shift you can get. Again, not a question. Most of them. Plus school. I did not answer that one. He already knew too much. He noticed my silence and gave the smallest nod, as if my refusal itself had told him something useful. Then he set the folder down on the table and crossed the room with unhurried steps until he stood close enough for me to catch the clean scent of starch and cedar from his shirt. Not touching, never quite crowding, just near enough that I understood he was used to deciding how much space existed between himself and everyone else. Listen carefully, Chloe, he said, and his voice had changed. Lower, more focused. When this room opens, you will go back to the staff entrance and finish your shift as if nothing happened. You will not speak to anyone about those documents. You will not answer questions from men you do not know. And when you leave tonight, you will not go home alone. Every nerve in my body went still. Excuse me. He did not blink. One of them memorized your face. I felt the blood drain from mine. He saw that too. Of course he did. I will have a car waiting, he said. You do not have to like that arrangement. You only have to survive it. When I walked back into the ballroom, everything looked offensively normal. The quartet was still playing something delicate and forgettable. Servers were still gliding between tables with polished smiles. A woman in emerald satin was laughing with her head tilted back like nothing in the world had ever truly threatened her. Somewhere near the dance floor, two men were discussing vacation properties in Aspen. It made me feel dizzy, that kind of polished denial. 5 minutes earlier, I had been in a private lounge being told not to go home alone by a man whose name people said like a warning. Now I was back to balancing appetizer trays beneath chandeliers, expected to act as if my life had not just narrowed into a much more dangerous shape. Denise intercepted me before I reached the service station. Are you finished causing problems for the evening? She asked without moving her lips. Her smile remained fixed for the benefit of a donor passing nearby. I did not cause the problem, I murmured. I noticed it. Her eyes flashed. That distinction means absolutely nothing to payroll. She adjusted the tray in my hands with brisk little movements meant to look helpful from a distance. You have two options. 1. Keep your head down for the next 90 minutes and pray nobody important complains. 2. Hand me your apron now and explain to accounting why I should not mark you as unfit for premium events. Which would you prefer? Humiliation burned under my skin again, hot and familiar. There are some people who know exactly how to make you feel small while technically giving you a choice. Denise was one of them. I swallowed whatever reply wanted to rise and simply said, I will finish the shift. Wonderful, she said, then disappear into competence. She turned away before I could answer. I stood there for one extra second, tray in hand, breathing through the anger until it flattened into something useful. Rent was due in 6 days. Utility bill in 4. Pride did not cover either of those. So I did what women like me always do when the world becomes absurd. I kept working. I cleared plates. I poured wine. I replaced linens and smiled at strangers whose cologne cost more than my winter coat. But Adrian's words followed me everywhere. You will not go home alone. They echoed each time I crossed the ballroom. Each time a man in a dark suit glanced in my direction. Each time I caught movement near the smoked glass lounge and wondered whether he was still inside, still recalculating the shape of whatever had almost happened at his table. I told myself I was overreacting. Men memorized faces all the time in rooms like that. Event staff noticed donors. Donors noticed servers. It did not have to mean anything, except the look that man had given me had not been casual. It had been precise, like placing a pin in a map. Around 11:30, Madison cornered me near the coffee station. You look pale, she said, handing me a stack of saucers. That is because my soul left my body about an hour ago. She gave a short snort that almost turned into a laugh. Did Morelli yell at you? No, that is somehow worse. I glanced across the room before answering. He said I should not leave alone tonight. Madison froze with a silver pitcher halfway to the espresso service tray. That is not a normal thing for a billionaire to say to a waitress. I gathered that. Chloe. Her voice dropped. Was he threatening you or protecting you? I thought about the way he had stood too close without touching me. The way he had spoken like every word cost something. The way he had looked at me when I said I was nobody. I do not know, I admitted. Madison stared at me for a beat, then shook her head slowly. That is absolutely not comforting. Before I could answer, Denise called her name from across the room, and she was gone again, pulled back into the choreography of service. I kept moving. That was the only way to survive nights like that. If you stop, you think. If you think, you unravel. By midnight the ballroom had shifted into that looser, Messier-phase rich parties always reached eventually. Jackets came off. Laughter got louder. Conversations leaned closer. The string quartet had given way to a jazz trio near the bar, and the air smelled like candle wax, citrus peels, and too much money. I was carrying a tray of empty coupes toward the service entrance when I saw him again. Adrian stood near the far end of the room, speaking to an older man with silver hair and the posture of somebody who had spent decades being obeyed. Adrian was listening, not talking, but even from across the ballroom I could tell he was not truly engaged in the conversation. His gaze lifted once and found me through the crowd with unnerving precision. My step faltered. Just for a second. He did not smile. He did not nod. But he held my eyes long enough to make one thing clear. He had not forgotten I was there. My pulse kicked once hard. Then I pushed through the service door and told myself to get a grip. The kitchen was hotter now, all steam and shouted table numbers and the clatter of dishes being sorted into industrial racks. I set down the tray and reached for the next assignment. That was when one of the younger busboys came in from the alley entrance looking uneasy. Hey, he said, glancing around until he spotted me. You are Chloe, right? Every instinct I had sharpened. Yes. He hesitated. There is a guy outside asking if you are done for the night. The room went very still around me, even though the noise never actually stopped. I kept my voice neutral. What guy? I do not know. He said he is a friend. My stomach dropped so fast it almost hurt. Friends did not wait by hotel alleys after midnight asking kitchen staff when your shift ended. Friends texted. Friends called. Friends forgot your schedule and apologized later. I set the towel down slowly, careful not to let my hands give me away. What does he look like? The busboy frowned, thinking. Gray coat. Nice shoes. Not hotel staff. Nice shoes. In Manhattan, that meant almost nothing. But Adrian's warning came back, with brutal clarity anyway. One of them memorized your face. Denise was shouting for coffee service on the other side of the kitchen. A dishwasher laughed at something in Spanish near the prep sink. Someone dropped a tray of forks and cursed. The whole world kept moving, loud and ordinary, while every nerve in my body turned to wire. I did not know whether the man outside was connected to the fake deal or whether fear was making me dramatic. What I did know was that Adrian Morelli had told me not to leave alone, and for the first time all night, I stopped wondering whether he was overreacting and started wondering if he had not been alarmed enough. I stood perfectly still for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. The kitchen noise kept crashing around me like it belonged to some other life. Plates clattered. Someone shouted for more creme brulee spoons. Steam rose from the dish station in hot white bursts. And in the middle of all that ordinary chaos, one quiet sentence kept repeating in my head. There is a man outside asking if you are done for the night. I looked at the busboy, Mateo, and forced myself to sound calmer than I felt. Did he say my full name? Mateo shook his head. Just Chloe. He said he did not want to come in through the front because he did not want to cause confusion. That did not help. In fact, it made everything worse. People with good intentions did not usually introduce themselves by sounding like a legal disclaimer. Did you tell him anything? I asked. No. I said I would check. He hesitated, then added, You want me to tell security? I almost said yes. Then I thought about hotel security, underpaid and polite and trained to manage drunk donors, not whatever kind of mess I had stepped into tonight. I also thought about Adrian telling me not to answer questions from men I did not know. The fact that he had been specific about questions and not just danger bothered me more now than it had before. He had not sounded dramatic. He had sounded prepared. No, I said quietly. Do not say anything yet. Mateo looked unconvinced, but he nodded and drifted back toward the alley door, probably deciding whether I was overreacting or just from New York. I turned and nearly collided with Madison, who took one look at my face and dropped the joking tone she usually wore like eyeliner. What happened? She asked. There is a man outside asking when my shift ends. Her brows pulled together immediately. Do you know him? No. Could he be from Morelli? I wanted to say yes because that would have been easier. Safer. But Adrian had said he would have a car waiting. He did not seem like a man who outsourced details and hoped for the best. I do not think so. Madison exhaled slowly through her nose. Okay, then I am staying with you until this is sorted out. You do not have to do that. I know, she said. That is why it counts. For one brief second, my eyes stung. Exhaustion does that. Fear does too. It makes kindness feel almost unbearable. Denise yelled for us both from the other side of the kitchen before I could say anything else. Madison squeezed my arm once and went to grab a tray. I forced myself back into motion because standing still made me feel like prey. I took 2 coffee orders to the East Lounge. Cleared dessert forks from a donor table near the bar. Refilled cream pitchers at the espresso station. Every task felt absurdly small compared to the panic buzzing just under my skin, but maybe that was why I clung to them. Small things can save you from large fear. Stack the cups. Fold the napkin. Keep breathing. By 12:30 the crowd had thinned just enough for the room to feel looser, sloppier. Some guests had left. Others had settled deeper into private conversations over brandy and impossible real estate. I was collecting abandoned place cards from a side table when I saw one of Adrian's men appear at the edge of the ballroom. He did not wave me over. He simply caught my eye and gave the smallest tilt of his head toward the smoked glass lounge. A message, not a request. My pulse stumbled once, then steadied. I handed the place cards to another server and followed. Adrian was not in the lounge this time. He was in the hallway just beyond it, jacket back on, phone in one hand, expression unreadable. He ended the call the second I approached. There is someone outside asking for you, he said. Not a question. I stared at him. You already know? I know enough. His gaze dropped briefly to the tray cloth still clutched in my hands like a shield. Did he approach you directly? No. He asked kitchen staff when I was done for the night. Adrian's jaw tightened by a fraction. Tiny movement. Huge effect. Then we are leaving now. The certainty in his voice hit me like cold water. I cannot just leave, I said. I am still on shift. He looked at me for one long second, and I realized with a strange burst of irritation that men like him had probably never had to explain hourly wages to anyone. You think Denise is my biggest problem tonight? I asked, sharper than I intended. Something changed in his face then. Not offense. Understanding. As if I had finally said the one thing he could not afford to dismiss. No, he said. I think Denise is the problem you know how to survive. I am concerned with the ones you do not. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Because he was right, and I hated that. He glanced toward the ballroom entrance. My driver is waiting in the underground garage. 2 of my men are checking the alley now. You will clock out. You will collect your bag. And you will come with me. The last 4 words landed with dangerous calm. Not possessive. Not pleading. Final. I should have refused on principle. I should have insisted on handling my own life, my own fear, my own stupid, dangerous night. But then I remembered the look on the fake banker's face. The quiet way Mateo had described the man outside. The fact that Adrian had known about it before I reached him. If I go with you, I said carefully, I am not agreeing to anything beyond getting home safely. One corner of his mouth moved, the slightest ghost of something that was not quite amusement. You think I need your agreement to keep you alive? I think you are used to people saying yes too quickly. That got his full attention. For half a heartbeat, the hallway went silent around us. Then he gave a single slow nod, like he had just revised a private estimate of me. Fair enough, he said. Then let us call this what it is. A temporary arrangement until I know who is looking for you. He stepped aside, giving me a clear path toward the service corridor. Get your things, Chloe. And do not make the mistake of thinking ordinary rules still apply to your night. I clocked out with shaking hands and a smile so fake it hurt my face. Denise barely looked at me when I handed over my apron, which somehow felt worse than if she had yelled. Madison hovered near the coffee station pretending to polish silverware while watching me like I might vanish if she blinked too slowly. When I grabbed my canvas tote from the staff locker, she stepped in front of me and lowered her voice. Text me the second you get home. I will. And if this turns out to be the beginning of your criminal heiress era, I want it on record that I was supportive but concerned. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Small. Frayed. Necessary. I hugged her quickly, because fear makes you sentimental in strange, inconvenient ways, then followed one of Adrian's men through a service elevator that smelled like metal and lemon cleaner. We went down 2 levels into the underground garage, where the hotel. Glamour disappeared completely. No chandeliers. No string music. Just concrete pillars, fluorescent lights, and luxury vehicles lined up in quiet rows like expensive secrets. Adrian was already there beside a black SUV that looked polished enough to reflect my entire bad decision back at me. He stood with one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding his phone, as calm as if midnight garage extractions were a normal part of event planning. When he saw me, he slipped the phone away and opened the rear passenger door himself. That should not have unsettled me, but it did. Powerful men are not supposed to do their own small gestures. They delegate them. Get in, he said. Not harsh. Not soft. Just certain. I glanced past him toward the far end of the garage, where 2 other men in dark coats were returning from the side access corridor. One of them shook his head once. No drama. Just information delivered in a movement. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze came back to me. The alley is clear now, he said. That does not mean it will stay that way. I wanted to say I could take the subway. I wanted to say I had been getting myself home in this city since I was 17, and no expensive man with a driver needed to supervise me. But pride is easiest to perform when you are not imagining strangers asking kitchen staff for your schedule. So I got in. The leather seat was cool and absurdly soft beneath me, and the inside of the SUV smelled faintly of cedar and clean fabric, not the heavy cologne I had expected. Adrian slid in across from me a second later, and one of his men took the front passenger seat while the driver pulled smoothly away from the garage. The city outside the tinted windows looked different from back there. More distant. More curated. Like Manhattan had become a movie about itself. We climbed the ramp to street level and joined the late-night traffic gliding along slick avenues under yellow lights. For the first minute or two, nobody spoke. I watched reflected storefronts slide across the glass, and tried not to think about how bizarre my life had become in less than 4 hours. Then Adrian broke the silence. "Give me your address." I turned to look at him. That is a very direct sentence for a man I met tonight. You prefer less direct ones? I prefer context. Something almost like approval touched his face again. He named a cross street in Queens before I could answer. My stomach dropped. You already know it. I know the building. I want to know if you intend to lie to me. The honesty of that was so outrageous, I actually stared at him. Do you usually threaten people this politely? Only the ones being difficult on purpose. I am not being difficult on purpose. I am being cautious on purpose. He held my gaze for a beat, then inclined his head once, conceding the point with surprising grace. Fair. I looked away first, because holding eye contact with him for too long felt like walking too close to the edge of something steep. 37th Avenue, I said finally, then gave the rest. He repeated it once to the driver. Not to memorize. To confirm. The SUV moved deeper into the city, past dark office towers and restaurants still glowing with last call warmth. My pulse had steadied, but the night had not released me yet. It sat under my skin, sharp and electric. What happens now? I asked. Adrian leaned back slightly, one arm resting along the seat, his expression unreadable in the passing streetlight. Now I determined whether tonight was opportunistic fraud or a coordinated message. And the difference? If it was opportunistic, the men at my table wanted money. He paused. If it was coordinated, someone wanted access. Which means you interrupted more than a transaction. I went cold all over again. Because of a fake transfer? Because people rarely spend that much effort on a lie unless the lie opens a door. I thought about the folder. The perfect paper. The polished wording. The seal visible at the wrong angle. You really believe I am in danger? I believe you are visible, he said. That is often enough. I folded my hands in my lap to keep from fidgeting. You keep talking like visibility is worse than guilt. He looked out the window for a moment before answering. In certain circles, it is. The quiet certainty in his voice told me he was not speaking theoretically. I studied his profile in the dim light. Strong nose. Controlled mouth. The kind of face newspapers would call handsome and enemies would call inconvenient. There was no showiness in him. No need to impress. Everything about Adrian Morelli suggested a man accustomed to moving through risk the way everyone else moved through weather. I should have found that reassuring. Instead, it made me wonder what kind of life taught a person to sound this calm while discussing danger. Why are you doing this? I asked before I could stop myself. He turned back to me slowly. Because you did not stay silent when silence would have been safer. That does not sound like gratitude. It is not. His eyes held mine, dark and unwavering. It is recognition. The word hit somewhere unexpectedly deep. I looked away again, toward the city sliding by in silver and gold fragments. Recognition. Not rescue. Not debt. Something more precise. More dangerous, maybe, because it suggested he saw me clearly and intended to keep doing so. We crossed into Queens a few minutes later, and the streets changed shape around us. Fewer polished facades. More corner stores with half-lit signs. Laundromats. Closed takeout spots. Apartment windows glowing over bodegas. My neighborhood. Familiar enough to slow my breathing for the first time all night. Then the SUV turned onto my block, and every bit of that relief vanished. A gray sedan sat across from my building with its headlights off. Empty maybe, or maybe not. I could not tell through the windshield. But Adrian saw it the same second I did. I knew because his posture changed almost imperceptibly, all that quiet elegance hardening into something far more focused. Do not open your door, he said, and this time there was no room left in his voice for argument. My hand was already on the door handle when Adrian's voice stopped me. Not loud, not sharp, just absolute. I froze with my fingers wrapped around polished metal and stared through the tinted glass at the gray sedan across the street. It was parked one space down from the hydrant, half under a dead street lamp, ordinary enough that I might have walked past it any other night without a second glance. That was what made it terrifying. Nothing about it announced danger. It just sat there in the dark like patience on 4 wheels. Do you know that car? Adrian asked. No, my voice came out thin. I cleared my throat and tried again. No, he gave a short nod to. The man in the front passenger seat. I had not caught his name earlier, but he moved the second Adrian looked at him, opening his own door with quiet efficiency and stepping out onto the curb without a trace of hurry. That was the thing about Adrian's people. They never rushed. They moved like men who trusted time to bend around them. I sat very still beside Adrian and watched the man cross the street in the glow of a corner bodega sign. He did not approach the sedan directly at first. He walked past it, glanced once through the windows, then kept going to the end of the block before circling back. The whole thing took less than a minute. When he returned, he leaned down slightly toward Adrian's cracked window. "Empty," he said. "Engine is cold." "Plates?" Adrian asked. "Rental." Adrian's jaw set. Not surprise. Calculation. "How long has it been there?" "Hard to tell." The man stepped back, eyes scanning the street with the casual thoroughness of someone who had spent years learning what other people overlooked. No one inside the building entry right now. No movement in the sedan. Adrian looked at me. "Do you have curtains facing the street?" The question was so mundane it took me half a second to answer. "Yes." "Do you keep them closed?" "Sometimes." "Tonight, you will." I stared at him. "You cannot actually think I am going up there alone now." "I do not." He said it immediately, as if that possibility had never existed for him at all. Relief hit me first. Then suspicion followed close behind, because relief from a man like Adrian Morelli probably came with terms and conditions printed in invisible ink. "What are my options?" I asked. He studied me for a second, maybe measuring whether I would hear practicality as insult. "Option 1. I place 2 men outside your building until morning, and 1 in the lobby if your superintendent can be persuaded to cooperate." Persuaded. Convincingly. That is not reassuring. It is not meant to be. He glanced once toward the apartment building entrance, then back to me. "Option 2. You stay somewhere else tonight." "With a friend?" "If you trust your friends to handle the possibility that someone follows you there." That closed my mouth. Because the answer was no. Madison had a 4th-floor walk-up in Astoria and exactly 1 lock. That actually worked. My aunt in Brooklyn would ask too many questions and then panic in ways that would make everything bigger. I had people, but I did not have people prepared for this. "And option 3? I asked quietly. Adrian held my gaze. "You come with me." There it was. Cleanly said. No performance. No false gentleness. Just a sentence that changed the shape of the air inside the SUV. I looked away first, toward my building with its chipped front steps and flickering vestibule light. Home. Or at least the version of home I had worked 3 jobs to keep. I could picture my tiny studio with humiliating clarity. The dish towel hanging crooked from the oven handle. The accounting textbook open on the card table by the window. My grandmother's old ceramic sugar bowl on the counter even though I did not use sugar. The life I understood. Small. Tired. Mine. And for the first time since I moved in, I did not know whether opening that apartment door was brave or stupid. "For how long?" I asked. "Tonight," Adrian said. "Tomorrow we reassess." "You make that sound simple." "It is not simple." His tone remained even. "It is necessary." I let out a slow breath and pressed my fingers against my temples. "You realize this is insane." "Yes." "I do not even know where you live." One brow lifted slightly. "That is your concern?" "One of several." It happened so quickly I almost missed it. The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly. More like the memory of one. "Manhattan," he said. "Upper East Side." That narrows it down to only several thousand terrifying possibilities. "You prefer a hotel?" "No." The answer came too fast, and I hated that he noticed. Hotels had hallways. Strangers. Public lobbies. Too many doors that looked the same. Adrian's world scared me, but it was at least a world already reacting to the same threat. "I prefer not becoming a missing persons podcast," I muttered. His eyes sharpened with that strange, quiet attention again. "Then we agree." The man in the front passenger seat got back in, and the driver eased the SUV forward from the curb without another word. My building slid past the window. So did the gray sedan. Empty or not, it sat there under the broken street lamp like a message no one had bothered to sign. I watched until the corner took it away. My chest felt tight, grief sneaking in where fear had already done most of the damage. It was a strange thing to mourn your own apartment while still paying rent on it. "You can send someone to get my things tomorrow," Adrian said after a moment. I turned toward him. "You have already decided I am not going back in the morning either?" "I have decided nothing beyond daylight, making everything easier to verify." "You really do answer questions like contracts. And you really do challenge men who are trying to help you." That depends on the man. Silence settled between us for a few blocks, but it was not empty, just full of things neither of us was saying. Outside, Queens gave way to bridges and black water and the sleepless glow of Manhattan waiting on the other side. I should have felt trapped. Maybe part of me did. But another part, quieter and more dangerous, felt something else. Safety, perhaps. Not because I trusted Adrian. Not yet. But because for the first time since I had leaned over that table and spoken up, someone more powerful than the threat had finally taken control of the board. We crossed back into Manhattan just after 1 a.m. The city looked colder now, cleaner somehow. All silver reflections and windows lit like watchful eyes. Adrian's phone buzzed once in his hand. He read the message without expression, typed a reply, then looked at me. The men from tonight did not use their real names, he said. That surprises absolutely no one, I murmured. One of them, however, was seen at a private banking event in Zurich 6 months ago under a different identity. He slipped the phone back into his coat. This was not random, Chloe. I stared at him. You found that out in the last 10 minutes? I asked the right person. There was no bragging in it. Just fact. Resources instinct. I looked back out the window because it was easier than looking directly at what kind of life made that sentence ordinary. When the SUV turned east and the streets grew quieter, lined with limestone facades and doormen and black iron lanterns, I understood with a small jolt that we were getting close. Adrian noticed the moment realization landed on my face. You were wondering if you should be more alarmed. Should I be? He considered that for a second. Only if you plan on lying to me. The SUV slowed beneath a stone front building with wrought iron balconies and discreet lighting warm as candle flame. A doorman stepped forward before we had fully stopped, already opening the main entrance with practiced deference. This place did not look like an apartment building. It looked like a place where governments were overthrown politely. I did not move right away. Adrian opened his own door, then paused and looked back at me from the edge of the sidewalk. You asked for context, he said. Here it is. Once you step out of this vehicle, my home becomes the safest place in New York for you tonight. But it also means you are inside my world now. Decide carefully. I should have said no. That is the honest version. I should have thanked him for the ride, asked him to drop me at a police station, or demanded a hotel room with locks and fluorescent lighting and no emotional consequences. Instead, I looked past Adrian at the open doorway of that limestone fortress and understood, with the kind of clarity that arrives only when you are too tired to lie to yourself, that safety and comfort are not always the same thing. Comfort was my tiny studio in Queens. Safety, tonight, looked like a man in a dark overcoat standing beneath warm lights while half of Manhattan moved around him as if his decisions had gravity. So I stepped out of the SUV. The night air hit me cold and sharp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant smoke from a street cart halfway down the block. The doorman did not stare, which somehow made everything feel even more surreal. He simply inclined his head at Adrian, then at me, with the kind of controlled discretion that suggested the building had seen stranger things than a waitress arriving after 1 a.m. in the back of a black SUV. Inside, the lobby was all quiet wealth. Marble floors the color of cream. Dark wood polished to a soft glow. A vase of white lilies on a table, so perfect it looked decorative rather than useful. No gold excess. No flashy art. Just old money whispering from every corner that it had never needed to introduce itself. My shoes sounded too cheap against the stone, and I hated that I noticed. Adrian noticed that I noticed. He notices everything, a voice in my head whispered, and that was becoming less an observation than a problem. We crossed the lobby without speaking and stepped into a private elevator that opened before I saw anyone press a button. Of course it did. The doors closed with a hush so smooth it barely sounded mechanical, and suddenly it was just the two of us in a mirrored box rising through the middle of his world. I looked at my reflection and nearly laughed. My hair was still pinned back from the gala, but strands had escaped around my face. My makeup had survived better than my nerves. My black uniform looked neat from a distance and exhausted up close. I looked like a woman who had wandered into the wrong chapter of someone else's life. Adrian stood beside me with his hands loose at his sides, not crowding me, not speaking, giving me the strange courtesy of silence. It should have made me feel less aware of him. It did the opposite. In the elevator's soft light, every detail sharpened. The clean line of his coat, the faint silver at his watch face, The way stillness sat on him like something expensive and tailored. He looked exactly like what people whispered he was. Powerful, controlled, dangerous in ways that did not need demonstration. The elevator opened directly into a foyer larger than my entire apartment. Not opulent. That would have been easier to process. This was curated. Intentional. Warm light, high ceilings, dark herringbone floors. Art that probably had security systems of its own, and windows beyond the living room stretching nearly floor to ceiling over the sleeping city. Manhattan glittered outside like a lie people kept agreeing to. I stopped just inside the threshold because my body did not know how to enter a place like that without permission. Adrian turned slightly toward me. "You are safe here." The words landed harder than I expected. Maybe because he did not say them dramatically. He said them like fact. Like law. "That is a large claim from a man I met tonight," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. His gaze held mine. "I do not make claims I cannot enforce." There it was. Again, that unsettling blend of reassurance and warning that seemed to follow him everywhere. Before I could answer, a woman in a navy dress appeared from a side hallway with the calm efficiency of someone who had worked in this apartment long enough to be unimpressed by extraordinary circumstances. She looked to be in her 50s, silver threaded through dark hair twisted neatly at the nape of her neck. Her eyes moved over me once, quick and kind and far too observant. "Lena," Adrian said. "Miss Parker will be staying the night." Not asking. Informing. Lena did not blink. "Of course, sir." She turned to me with a warmth so gentle I nearly sagged from relief. "Would you like tea, Miss Parker? Or something stronger? Tonight looks like it has been unkind." I almost laughed at the understatement. "Tea would be great. Thank you. Chamomile or black?" "Black." "Good answer," she said softly, and for the first time since midnight, I felt a tiny crack appear in the shell around my ribs. She disappeared down the hallway with soundless efficiency. I looked back at Adrian. "You keep a house manager awake at 1 in the morning?" "Lena keeps herself awake if she thinks I am likely to bring trouble home." "And do you often?" "Often enough that she stocks excellent tea." I stared at him, and this time the laugh actually escaped. Small, disbelieving, entirely against my better judgment. Something eased in his face when he heard it. Not much, just enough that I realized he had been tracking my tension the way a pilot tracks weather. "You can stop waiting for the room to become dangerous," he said quietly. "If danger had followed us inside, you would know." I should have found that comforting. Instead, it painted vivid pictures of all the ways a person like Adrian Morelli must define normal. I set my bag down beside a chair that probably cost more than my used car had. "So what happens now?" "Now you drink tea," he said. "You answer a few questions. Then you sleep. And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I decide whether you can go home." A flash of irritation cut through my exhaustion. "You decide?" His eyes sharpened instantly. "Would you prefer I pretend this no longer involves me?" "I would prefer not to sound like luggage." Silence held for 1 beat. 2. Then Adrian crossed the room and stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head up, but not so close that I felt cornered. It was a careful distance. Intentional. "You do not sound like luggage, Chloe." His voice was lower now, stripped of the cool distance he wore in public. "You sound like someone who stepped in front of a moving problem and is angry that consequences travel faster than subway lines." I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because he was not wrong, and somehow that made me want to argue more. "I am not used to being managed," I said. "Good." The answer came without hesitation. "People who are comfortable being managed rarely notice fraud worth $250 million. That should not have affected me. But it did. Because under the irritation, under the fear and the absurdity and the lingering ache in my feet, there it was again. Recognition. Not flattery. Not charm. Something more precise. Lena returned then with a silver tray carrying a teapot, 2 cups, and a plate of butter cookies so delicate they looked fictional. She set them down on a low table near the windows and moved away with the instinctive grace of someone who knew exactly when privacy was more useful than help. Adrian gestured toward the seating area. "Sit. You do enjoy sounding like a command." "I enjoy being listened to." "That must make New York very satisfying for you." His mouth almost curved again. Almost. I sat because I was too tired to remain dramatic on principle, and because the couch looked like it had been engineered by people who believe comfort was a human right. Adrian took the chair across from me rather than the space beside me, which should not have felt significant, but did. It gave me room. Choice. Air. Lena poured the tea and disappeared once more, leaving the apartment wrapped in a quiet so complete I could hear the faint ticking of an antique clock somewhere beyond the library doors. Adrian waited until I had wrapped both hands around the cup before speaking again. "Tell me everything your grandmother taught you about private banking," he said. Then his gaze dropped briefly to the canvas tote at my feet, where the corner of my accounting textbook peeked out beneath my sweater, and when he looked back at me, something in his expression had changed. "And after that," he said softly, "you can explain why a waitress from Queens is studying the exact language that nearly got her killed tonight." For a moment, I just stared at him over the rim of the teacup. Not because I did not understand the question, because I understood it too well. Most people looked at me and saw the uniform first. Black skirt, sensible shoes, tired eyes. End of story. Adrian looked at the textbook in my bag and somehow saw the pages I had not even finished writing yet. I set the cup down carefully on its saucer because my hands had started trembling again, and I was getting tired of him noticing every weakness before I had time to hide it. "My grandmother worked in private banking for most of her life," I said. "Back when institutions still believed discretion was a moral virtue instead of a marketing slogan." Adrian leaned back slightly in the chair, one ankle crossing over the opposite knee, his expression unreadable but attentive in that unsettling way of his. He never interrupted. That was another thing powerful men were not supposed to do. They were supposed to dominate conversations, not sharpen them by withholding noise. She handled client ledgers, transfer documentation, identity confirmations. I continued. Mostly for wealthy families who wanted their money moved quietly and correctly. She used to say that rich people would forgive almost anything except clerical embarrassment. That earned the faintest shift in his mouth. She is not wrong. No, she never was, which was annoying. The words slipped out before I could edit them. Something in Adrian's face softened by half an inch. Enough to make me keep going. After she retired, her hands got bad. Arthritis. She could not write the way she used to, so she taught instead. Me mostly. Numbers. Italian. How to read formal banking language. How to spot inconsistencies. She had this whole theory that fraud reveals itself in vanity before it reveals itself in math. Adrian's gaze stayed on me. Meaning real professionals are usually boring, clean, precise, invisible. Fakes try too hard to look legitimate. They overbuild the language. Use seals too prominently. Phrasing too polished. Fonts that impress people who think expensive paper equals truth. I paused, thinking back to the folder at the gala. Tonight was vanity. Whoever made those documents wanted them admired. Adrian said nothing for a second. Then, "That matches what my analysts found in the preliminary review." I blinked. "You already had analysts reviewing it while I was drinking tea?" "Chloe," he said, with a patience that somehow managed to feel both elegant and dangerous. "Some of us multitask under pressure." I should not have smiled. I did anyway. It vanished quickly, but not before he saw it. Of course he did. I looked down at the tea, black and fragrant in its delicate porcelain cup, and tried to remember that this was still insane. That I was still in the apartment of a man whose name made people lower their voices. That being understood by him should not feel this disarming. "I did not plan this, you know," I said quietly. "Studying accounting, I mean. No one plans accounting for pleasure." "Exactly." I wrapped both hands around the cup again, grateful for the heat. "My mother used to say I was going to become something glamorous because I hated practical shoes as a kid. Then she got sick. Then my grandmother moved in. Then life became a series of bills with due dates attached to them like threats." I shrugged, but the movement felt brittle. Banking language paid better than dreams. So I took classes. Nights. Community college first, then certificate courses. I waitress because tuition does not care whether I am tired. The apartment stayed very quiet around us. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered in expensive silence. Inside, there was just the faint ticking of that unseen clock and Adrian watching me like every sentence mattered. "And your grandmother?" he asked. "She passed 2 years ago." The answer came cleanly because grief that old settles into the bone. It stops behaving like injury and starts behaving like weather. Always there. Sometimes louder. I kept studying after that because she had already built the ladder. Felt disrespectful not to keep climbing it. Adrian looked down briefly, fingertips brushing the arm of the chair once, a tiny movement that felt oddly human on him. "I am sorry." He said it simply. No performance. No polished sympathy. And because of that, I believed him. "Thank you," I said. The silence that followed was different from the others. Less interrogative. More weighted. As if something had shifted without either of us announcing it. I broke eye contact first and glanced toward my bag, where my textbook still stuck out like evidence. "I was supposed to take an exam next week," I said. "Advanced financial controls. Very glamorous life I lead. You were going to pass." I looked back at him. "You sound very sure for someone who met me 6 hours ago. You corrected a cross-border transfer fraud while carrying champagne." His tone stayed level, but there was something under it now. Something warmer than amusement, sharper than praise. "I am comfortable making a few limited assumptions about your competence. That should not have affected me. Praise from men like Adrian Morelli should have rolled right off a woman with common sense. Instead it landed somewhere inconveniently deep, because it was not empty. It was specific, earned, dangerous for that reason alone." I exhaled slowly and leaned back against the couch for the first time since sitting down. The cushions were absurdly soft. The tea was strong and exactly how I liked it. My body, traitorous thing that it was, had begun to notice exhaustion now that immediate fear had loosened its grip. Adrian noticed that too. "You are fading," he said. "I am functioning. Barely. It is a skill." He gave me another of those almost smiles. "I have heard." I frowned slightly. "From who?" "From your face." I stared at him, then laughed once under my breath before I could help it. That is an alarming sentence. It was intended as an observation, not a threat. "You really do live in a narrow emotional range, do not you?" That got his full attention. His eyes sharpened, but not with offense. With curiosity. "Is that what you think?" "I think," I said carefully, because something about the hour and the tea and the fact that my life had already gone completely off its rails made honesty feel less expensive than usual. "That you are very good at sounding calm, while making everyone else feel like the floor could disappear at any second." Adrian held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "That is fair." The answer surprised me enough that I forgot to breathe for half a beat. Men like him were not supposed to accept criticism. They were supposed to crush it or charm around it. He did neither. He just absorbed it and stayed exactly where he was. "Tell me something," he said softly. "When you looked at those documents tonight, what frightened you first? The size of the fraud or the fact that you understood it?" I opened my mouth with the easy answer ready. The obvious one. The safer one. But maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the tea. Maybe it was the terrifying fact that Adrian had become the one person in the room least interested in being lied to. "Neither," I said at last. What frightened me first was how easy it would have been to stay quiet. Something changed in his face then. Deepened, maybe. Not softer. More serious. As if that answer had unlocked a door I could not see. He leaned forward just slightly, forearms resting on his knees, his attention so complete it felt like standing in warm light and cold water at the same time. "That," he said, voice low enough to turn the room smaller, "is the first thing you have said tonight that makes me believe you fully understand the world you just stepped into." The room felt different after that. Not safer exactly, just more honest. The city still glittered beyond the windows like money had found a way to become weather, but inside Adrian's apartment the air had shifted into something sharper, quieter, harder to misread. He did not speak for several seconds after I answered him, and for once I did not rush to fill the silence. I had the strange sense that something important was moving beneath it, like gears turning behind a locked wall. Adrian stood and crossed to the windows, one hand sliding into his pocket as he looked out over the sleeping grid of Manhattan. From where I sat, he was all clean lines and restraint, dark suit against the glass, the kind of man who looked as if he had been built specifically to make certainty feel elegant. "You think silence is harmless until you see what it protects," he said at last. "Then you spend the rest of your life deciding whether the cost of speaking is survivable." I watched him in the reflection first, then directly. That sounds very personal for a man who prefers sounding like a contract. One corner of his mouth moved. "Perhaps you are a bad influence." That is not what Denise at the hotel would say. I suspect Denise lacks imagination. I should not have smiled again, but exhaustion had worn down the border patrol in my brain. Adrian turned back toward me, and whatever almost humor had crossed his face faded. You asked earlier why I was doing this, he said. The simplest answer is because someone tried to put fraudulent paper in front of me and you prevented it. The more complicated answer is because that attempt should not have gotten as close as it did. He paused. That means one of two things. Either my systems are weaker than I believed, or someone inside one of them wanted to test the perimeter. And you do not know which is worse, I said quietly. I know exactly which is worse. The answer came flat and immediate. I am still determining which one I am dealing with. That settled heavily between us. I thought about what he had said in the car. Not random. A door hidden inside a lie. What were they trying to access? I asked. Adrian's gaze held mine for a moment before he answered, measuring, I thought, how much truth to hand me. Not money directly, he said. Money was the bait. The transfer authorization would have granted temporary validation across 3 linked institutions. Enough to move through compliance barriers. Enough to create trusted access where there should have been scrutiny. He walked back toward the seating area slowly, each word precise. Whoever built that fraud understands procedure. They were not trying to steal $250 million in one move. They were trying to make me open the gate myself. A chill slid down my arms. And if you had signed? By tomorrow morning, they would have had pathways into accounts, shell entities, and private channels that take years to build cleanly. He did not dramatize it. He did not need to. The scale of it sat in the calmness of his voice. It would not have ruined me, he added. But it would have announced weakness. That is often more expensive. I looked down at the dark tea in my cup, now cooling. So when I spoke up, I did not just embarrass 2 fake bankers. No, he sat down again. But this time forward on the edge of the chair rather than back into it. The distance between us shrinking just enough to feel deliberate. You interrupted a map someone had been drawing for months. My stomach tightened, which means they are not just angry. They are adjusting. Adrian nodded once. Yes. The simplicity of that yes made the room feel colder than the winter city outside. I should have felt regret then. Real, crushing regret. The kind that makes you wish you had chosen silence and let rich men destroy one another with elegant paperwork. But what I felt instead was stranger. Anger, maybe. At whoever had assumed a room full of powerful men and tired workers was the perfect place to hide a lie. At the idea that people like me were expected to notice everything and say nothing. You keep saying I stepped into your world, I said. But fraud-like, that does not belong only to your world. It spills. It lands somewhere. People who do not have a chair at the table always pay for those games eventually. Adrian's eyes did not leave my face. I know. Do you? The question came out sharper than I intended, but I was too tired now to care about etiquette. Because from where I am sitting, men like you survive these things with better lawyers. People like me survive them by skipping groceries. The silence after that should have been catastrophic. Instead, Adrian just looked at me, really looked, and something in his expression changed into a kind of stillness that felt more vulnerable than softness ever could. My father built his first company after losing everything twice before he was 30, he said quietly. I grew up watching men in good suits underestimate what survival teaches the rest of us. That was the most he had said about himself all night, and the fact that it came without flourish made it feel heavier. I studied him in the warm apartment light and tried to fit that sentence into the polished man in front of me. It fit more easily than I wanted it to. So this is inherited paranoia? I asked. Refined paranoia, he corrected. There is a difference. Of course there is. That nearly smile touched his mouth again and vanished. Then his phone buzzed on the table beside him. He picked it up, read the screen, and I watched the shift happen in real time. Not dramatic. More dangerous than that. His whole body went still in a new way, attention narrowing into something hard enough to cut with. What? I asked. He did not answer immediately. His thumb moved once across the screen. Then he set the phone down face up on the table between us. One of the men from tonight used a temporary identity tied to a consulting firm that no longer exists, he said. The registration address for that firm was linked, 6 weeks ago, to a property acquisition in Queens. My throat tightened. Queens is a large borough. Yes. His gaze locked on mine. The property is 3 blocks from your building. The words did not feel real at first. They hung in the room like a sentence from someone else's life. 3 blocks. Not Switzerland. Not some offshore address beyond imagination. 3 blocks from the laundromat where I lost socks every other Sunday. 3 blocks from the deli that knew I liked too much cream cheese on my bagels. 3 blocks from home. That could be a coincidence, I said, and hated how thin the hope sounded. It could, Adrian agreed. Do you believe that? He held my gaze for one long second, and in that second I already knew the answer before he gave it. No. I looked away toward the windows because suddenly Manhattan seemed easier to face than the truth sitting across from me. My life had been small yesterday. Manageable. Bills, shifts, exams, subway delays. All the exhausting little mechanics of being ordinary. Now a man with a private elevator was telling me that an identity linked to fraud had surfaced near my block, and the worst part was not that I believed him. It was that I no longer found it impossible. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from the strange hollow feeling that comes when fear stops being theoretical and starts collecting addresses. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He stood, walked to a sideboard, and returned with a folded cashmere throw the color of charcoal. He handed it to me without comment. The gesture was so unexpectedly human that for half a second I forgot how to breathe. I took it and draped it over my shoulders. It smelled faintly of clean wool and cedar. Thank you, I said. Do not thank me yet. His voice was quiet now, but steel sat beneath it. If that property is active, then tonight was not just a test of my perimeter. It was a staging point near yours. He looked toward the windows, then back at me, decision settling over him like a door locking. Which means by morning, I am not just investigating who targeted my institutions. I am finding out why they chose a block near you to watch from before you ever opened your mouth at that table. Sleep should have been possible after that. I had tea in my system, a blanket around my shoulders that probably cost more than my monthly MetroCard budget, and a guest room somewhere in a palace above Manhattan waiting for me. Instead, I sat on Adrian Morelli's couch at nearly 2 a.m. feeling as if the floor of my life had been removed one careful tile at a time. He remained standing near the windows, phone in one hand, city lights outlining him in silver and shadow. I hated how steady he looked. I hated more that some part of me found that steadiness anchoring. Before I said anything, I asked quietly, "You think they were already near my building before tonight?" Adrian turned toward me. I think coincidences become less convincing when they begin stacking in the same direction. That is not an answer. It is the honest one. He crossed the room and sat again. This time not in the chair opposite me, but on the far end of the same couch, leaving a careful distance between us. Enough space for choice. Not enough to pretend the air had not changed. Listen to me carefully, Chloe, he said. There are 3 possibilities. First, the property link is operational coincidence. Someone involved in the fraud used an address near your neighborhood because Queens offers anonymity and low scrutiny. Second, they identified you earlier than tonight for reasons we do not yet understand. Third, you were never the target. You were the witness they did not plan for. And now proximity is becoming narrative because fear makes patterns out of partial truth. I absorbed that in silence. The first possibility was bad. The second was worse. The third should have comforted me, but it did not, because none of them ended with my life returning neatly to before. Which one do you believe? I asked. Adrian looked at me for a long moment. I believe the second possibility deserves the most respect until proven otherwise. Respect. That was the word he chose. As if danger were not chaos, but a rival worthy of discipline. I pulled the throw tighter around myself. Why would anyone identify me before tonight? I am not important. You keep saying that as if importance is fixed. His voice stayed low and even. It is not. Sometimes it is created by position. Sometimes by timing. Sometimes by what a person is able to understand in a room full of people who assumed she could not. I looked down at my hands. So now I am strategically inconvenient. Yes. The bluntness of it should have offended me. Instead it made my throat tighten. Because there it was again. Truth without perfume. Adrian did not waste language trying to make ugly things sound acceptable. He just named them and moved them where they needed to go. What if I had stayed quiet? I asked before I could stop myself. Would any of this still be happening? He did not answer immediately, and that delay told me more than the answer itself might have. Some version of it, he said at last. But not this one. I stared past him at the city. That is a miserable distinction. Most important ones are. The antique clock somewhere beyond the library doors ticked into the silence again. I wondered what time Madison had finally gotten home. I wondered whether she was brushing pins out of her hair while watching bad reality television and cursing rich people on principle. I wondered what my apartment looked like right now in the dark. Empty. Familiar. Maybe watched. The thought made my stomach turn. I need to text my friend, I said. Adrian nodded once. Do it. I pulled out my phone and sent Madison the simplest message I could manage. Safe. Not home. We'll explain tomorrow. 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then returned. Finally, a reply came through. That is the most alarming text I have ever received. I will allow it because I am afraid. I stared at it for a second and laughed softly through my nose. Adrian noticed. Your friend? Yes. Keep her. The simplicity of it startled me enough to glance up. He was not joking. That sounded suspiciously human, I said. Do not spread it around. I shook my head once, then set my phone face down on the coffee table. Fatigue was pressing harder now, blurring the edges of the room. But fear still sat bright and ugly at the center of everything. If they were near my building before tonight, I said slowly, then either they were watching the neighborhood or they were watching someone in it. Adrian did not look away. Yes. And if it was me, then that means this has nothing to do with my speaking up at the gala. Not necessarily nothing. But not only that. I let that settle. It was terrible. It was also clarifying. Because if this started earlier, then maybe the question was not what I interrupted tonight. Maybe the question was why I had been anywhere near the edge of it to begin with. My grandmother, I said suddenly. Adrian's expression shifted. What about her? She used to keep old files. Nothing official, not really. Notes. Habits. Observations. She was old school. She did not trust that memory alone could protect people. My pulse quickened as the thought formed more fully. When she got sick, I packed most of her things into boxes. I kept some books, some ledgers she used to teach me, letters, photographs. They are in my apartment. In the closet. Adrian went very still beside me. What kind of ledgers? Practice ones, mostly. Old templates. Sample transfer sheets. She used them to teach me pattern recognition. I paused. But she also had one locked document case. Small. Black. She never let me open it. After she died, I could not bring myself to force it. Adrian's gaze sharpened into something almost surgical. And where is that case now? I swallowed. Top shelf of my closet. Wrapped in one of her sweaters. The room seemed to contract around that answer. Adrian leaned back slightly, but I could feel the intensity coming off him all the same. Did anyone besides you know you kept her records? Not that I can think of. Then I frowned. Maybe my aunt knew. And one of the movers when I changed apartments last year. But I never talked about the case because I assumed it was private and probably meaningless. Adrian looked toward the windows, thinking, meaningless is not a category I trust. Neither did she. The words came out softer than I intended. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian stood abruptly, not with panic, but with decision. He picked up his phone and made one call. I need a team. At the Queen's address at first light, he said without preamble. Discreet entry only if she authorizes it. Until then, nobody touches the unit. I want the building watched, the street mapped, and every property transfer within a 5-block radius cross-checked against Shell registrations from the Zurich list. He listened for a moment, then added, and find out whether any archive firms, estate handlers, or moving companies intersected with the Parker family in the past 24 months. He ended the call and turned back to me. You think my grandmother left something people still want, I said. I think, Adrian replied, that older banking professionals often kept the kinds of notes institutions later pretended never existed. He paused. And I think men willing to build a $250 million fraud do not limit themselves to one approach if they suspect a document survived. I felt suddenly, vividly cold under the cashmere throw. She told me once that people hide dangerous things inside ordinary paperwork because nobody fears paper until it starts costing someone power. Adrian's gaze held mine, dark and unwavering. Your grandmother was a very intelligent woman. She was difficult, I said automatically. Those are often related. Despite everything, I let out the smallest laugh. It vanished as quickly as it came. If that case matters, then my apartment is not just unsafe. It is exposed. Yes. And if someone has already been near my building, then morning became too late about 10 minutes ago. He checked the time on his phone, then looked back at me with a focus so complete it made the rest of the room fall away. You are going to tell me everything you remember about that case. Every label, every key, every conversation your grandmother ever had around it. Then you are going upstairs to sleep for 3 hours while I make sure no one reaches your apartment before we do. I stood too fast, the blanket sliding from my shoulders, pulse suddenly loud in my ears. I am coming with you. Adrian did not blink. No, it is my apartment. Which is exactly why you are not walking into a place that may already be under observation. You do not get to decide that alone. Tonight I do. The words landed hard, but not cruelly. Like a door closing against weather. I stared at him, furious and frightened and more awake than I had been in an hour. You cannot keep talking to me like I am a problem to be stored until daylight. He took one step closer, then stopped, leaving exactly enough room for me to breathe. Then stop giving dangerous people reasons to think they can reach you through your own front door, he said quietly. The force of it was not in volume. It was in certainty, in the terrible possibility that he was right. I looked away first, because anger is easier to hold than fear until someone names fear correctly. When I finally spoke, my voice came out thinner than I wanted. There is no key, I said. Not a normal one. The case had a combination dial. For numbers. I never knew them. But my grandmother used to touch the back panel after she opened it, like there was another latch hidden there. Adrian went still. Completely still. A false back, he said. Maybe. My heart was pounding now. She once told me that if I ever opened it, I should read the pages in the dark first, because some truths look different when light hits them. Adrian's expression changed in a way I had not seen before all night. Not softer. Not warmer. More dangerous. Because beneath the control I saw something fierce and immediate wake up. Ultraviolet, he said. Or heat-sensitive ink. He did not look surprised. He looked confirmed. Then his phone lit up again in his hand. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he read erased every remaining trace of calm from the edges of the room. He lifted his eyes to mine. Chloe, he said, voice suddenly stripped down to steel. Someone just entered your building. For one impossible second, the entire apartment went silent. Not literally. The clock still ticked somewhere beyond the library. The city still hummed behind the glass. My own breathing still moved in and out of my lungs. But all of it dropped behind the single sentence Adrian had just spoken, as if the world itself understood that everything had narrowed to one address in Queens and one closet shelf I had not touched in 2 years. Who? I asked, and my voice did not sound like mine. Adrian was already moving. Phone back to his ear before I finished the word. Do not lose visual, he said into the line, every syllable clipped clean. No. Engagement unless they reach your unit. I want floor confirmation, stairwell confirmation, and building exit coverage now. He listened for half a second, then turned and crossed to a narrow console near the hallway where a set of keys lay in a leather tray. If they touch the door, I want the timestamp before they breathe again. He ended the call and looked at me. The room had changed around him. All the quiet elegance was still there, the warm lights, the art, the impossible view. But Adrian himself had become something sharper, more focused, like the calm from earlier had not disappeared so much as condensed into a blade. Get your coat, he said. You just told me I was not coming. You are not going to the apartment. Then where am I going? With me. I stared at him. That sounds suspiciously like the same thing. It is not. He stepped closer, already reaching for the charcoal coat draped over the back of a nearby chair, and handed it to me. My team is at your building. I need you near enough to answer questions if we have to identify the case quickly, but not visible on the street and not inside that unit unless I say so. The command in his voice should have irritated me. It did irritate me. It also made sense, which was far worse. I took the coat because my hands needed something to do. You are asking me to sit in a car while strangers go through my life. I am preventing strangers from rewriting it. The answer landed hard. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I shoved my arms into the coat. It was too large, the shoulders broad, the sleeves a little long, and smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. Adrian noticed the instant I realized what I was wearing. It is clean, he said, as if that were the issue. That is not why this is alarming. You no longer have the luxury of being alarmed by tailoring. Despite everything, a short, disbelieving sound escaped me. Not laughter exactly. Survival wearing the mask of it. Adrian's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen, and his expression went colder by a degree. The lobby camera is down, he said. Of course it is, I whispered. Because apparently the universe had decided subtlety was no longer necessary. Adrian looked at me then, really looked, taking in the fear I was no longer hiding well enough. The way my fingers had curled into the fabric at my wrists, the fact that exhaustion had finally lost its battle with adrenaline. Chloe. My name sounded different in his voice now. Not softer. More precise. More personal, which was somehow worse. Stay with me. I am trying. No, he stepped in close enough that I could see the dark ring around his irises, the tiny line of strain at the edge of his mouth. I mean literally. Do not leave my side tonight. Not for a hallway. Not for a phone call. Not because you think you are helping. Whatever this is, it started before the gala, and it accelerated the moment you spoke. That means the rules changed. Do not make me repeat that. Most men sounded ridiculous when they tried to control a room through tone alone. Adrian's sounded like gravity explaining itself. I swallowed and nodded once because I did not trust my voice. Something in his expression eased at the edges, but only for a moment. Then he turned, issued 2 quiet instructions to someone through the phone, and guided me toward the private elevator with one hand hovering near the small of my back without actually touching me. The restraint of that nearly undid me more than contact would have. Down in the lobby, everything moved with unnerving efficiency. The doorman had already opened the entrance. A black sedan waited at the curb this time instead of the SUV, lower profile, darker glass. One of Adrian's men stood by the rear door scanning the street with the relaxed alertness I was beginning to understand meant nothing had been left to chance. Manhattan at 2 in the morning looked polished and indifferent, its sidewalks damp from earlier mist, traffic thinner now, storefronts reflecting long strips of gold across the pavement. It was obscene how normal the city looked while my apartment might be under watch by people searching for a dead woman's papers. Adrian slid in beside me the second the car pulled away. Tell me everything about the closet, he said. No small talk. No transition. I closed my eyes for one heartbeat, reaching back through memory. Narrow hall closet just inside the apartment, I said. Coats on the left. Cleaning supplies and extra towels on the bottom. Top shelf has 2 banker boxes, 1 suitcase, winter boots, and the case wrapped in my grandmother's brown cardigan. Locked. Closet no? Case yes. Visible if someone searches quickly? Only if they know to look up. Adrian relayed that to the man in the front seat, who repeated it into an earpiece with the kind of calm that made the whole thing feel even more surreal. We crossed back into Queens faster than seemed possible, the city thinning into neighborhoods I recognized in flashes. Delis with metal grates down. A laundromat still glowing under fluorescent lights. The 24-hour pharmacy where I once bought cough syrup and eyeliner in the same exhausted transaction. Familiar streets made unfamiliar by the fact that I was seeing them from behind bulletproof glass beside a man who treated crisis like a language he had spoken since childhood. Why did you not tell anyone about the case? Adrian asked. Because grief makes odd archivists of us, I said quietly. And because if I opened it, and it turned out to be nothing, then I would have broken the last rule she ever gave me for no reason. Adrian was silent for a second. And if it was not nothing? I looked out the window toward the dark blocks slipping by. Then maybe part of me always knew I was not ready to inherit it. The sedan slowed 3 streets away from my building and turned into the shadowed side entrance of a closed dental office lot. Another vehicle was already there. 2 of Adrian's men stood near it, one speaking into a phone, the other watching the corner with patient intensity. No sirens. No chaos. Just quiet action, which somehow made it feel more real. Adrian got out first, then turned and offered me a hand. I hesitated only because my whole life had taught me not to accept elegant gestures from dangerous men. Then I saw the look on his face. No impatience. No performance. Just a decision already made. I took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, brief. He let go the second I was steady, but the imprint of it stayed with me anyway. You stay here, he said. No. The refusal came automatically. Adrian did not even blink. You stay with me, he corrected, and guided me toward the second vehicle, a dark SUV parked deeper in the lot where the street would not catch the windows. From there, through a narrow angle past a row of bare winter trees, I could see my block. My building sat under the same broken street lamp, plain brick, chipped steps, buzzers that only worked when they felt like it. Home. Except tonight, it looked like a photograph of home, something familiar flattened into evidence. One of Adrian's men approached the driver's side window as we got in. "Third floor hall light is on," he said. "Super says it burns out every week, but tonight it is working. Unit doors on your floor are closed. No visible movement from the street. Team 2 is inside with the tenant on too. They heard somebody in the stairwell 10 minutes ago." My pulse thudded so hard it hurt. Adrian's attention sharpened even further. "Her unit? No confirmation yet. Get it." The man nodded and moved off. I sat frozen, eyes fixed on my building, trying to reconcile the ordinary rectangle of my third-floor window with the fact that strangers might already be inside. Adrian reached into the center console, took out a small black flashlight, and handed it to me. "Ultraviolet setting is on the second switch," he said. I stared at it. "You just happen to have that in the car?" "I have learned to reward useful paranoia." Another message came through his phone. He read it, and this time his gaze went to my building and stayed there. "They are at your door," he said quietly. Every muscle in my body locked. "Your team?" "No," the word dropped into the car like cold metal. I looked up just in time to see a shape move behind the thin curtain of my apartment window. One shadow, then another. Not imagination. Not fear making patterns from night. Real movement. Crossing the room where my grandmother's sugar bowl still sat on the counter and my exam notes were spread across the little table by the window. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. Adrian saw it too. I knew because his hand closed once around the edge of the seat between us, the only outward sign that anything in him had shifted at all. "Stay here," he said, already opening the door. Then he looked back at me, and for the first time all night the command in his voice carried something raw beneath it. Not just control, not just strategy, something fiercely personal and dangerously close to anger. "Whatever happens next," he said, "you do not let them take one more thing that belongs to you."